Okay, I'm Reverend Gilbert H. Caldwell, retired United Methodist minister, active in the civil rights movement, having met Martin Luther King some 61 years ago at Boston University School of Theology. We met there, and because of that first meeting, then I became involved in all of the major national events. I've pastored churches, predominantly black and predominantly white churches, from Boston to Denver. I'm, of course, the proud father of two sons. My wife and I have been married for 61 years, and we have one granddaughter, Dale's daughter, Ashley.
And I'm Dr. Dale Caldwell, proud to be here with my dad and my mom, who was a school teacher for 50 years. My daughter's 14, and I have a brother in Maryland who's an engineer. I'm the executive director of the Rothman Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Fairleigh Dickinson University. In addition, I founded a 501c3 nonprofit called the Dale Caldwell Foundation, focused on reducing involuntary poverty throughout the world.
Well, I, of course, in some ways, I, of course, am a Southerner, born in Greensboro, North Carolina in 1933. And growing up in that environment, of course, obviously rigid racial segregation. But I had a mother who was more of an activist than my father was, and she felt that breaking down barriers was important. And so that sort of precipitated my involvement. She suggested, and I agreed, that we ought sort of push some of the institutions in North Carolina where I was living. And so we pushed even the Methodist Church, and I, in fact, applied for divinity school at Duke Divinity School and was rejected because of my race. And there was a Methodist camp, it's still there, called Lake Junaluska, and I was discriminated. I could not use the swimming facilities. So I think really growing up in a segregated environment made me want to resist and push. And I guess out of that, the rest is history in terms of my involvement in civil rights, my pushing the United Methodist Church in terms of its negativity, in terms of the practice of homosexuality. We're wrestling with that right now. And so I've been an activist. And I guess the final thing I would say is that I've discovered that not only being an activist for racial causes, but being an ally, an activist, an ally for other causes has meant much to me, particularly in my retirement years.
In addition, I'd add, as some saw, my dad and mom were part of a CBS story that went viral, where some fifth grade students heard that on their honeymoon they were discriminated against, weren't allowed to stay at a lodge in the Poconos, and had to find a hunting lodge to live on their honeymoon. And as you've said often, that helped to really spur this idea of because you came to the North thinking the North was so much better than the South. And so I think that probably helped you kind of say, I've got to make this my life's mission to make a difference and to help other people not to survive.
I guess I should have known that because, of course, one of the other things, my first experience with New Jersey was when I came to New Jersey, going up south to work in the summers in Atlantic City. And again, I thought I was coming to an unsegregated place, but the experience that I had for 2 summers was that I was working in hotels where I could not be a guest, and in fact working in restaurants where I could not be served as a customer. So in fact, I came to New Jersey and discovered that segregation was not just a deep Southern thing, it unfortunately was a national kind of thing.
And for my generation, I'm president of the Brunswick Board of Education. I'm president of the largest special need school district, the Educational Services Commission of New Jersey, is that I see so many young people who are white, black, Latino, Asian, who really don't know the history. And so part of what, and Dad and I have been doing this kind of tour to remind people, not just of the bad things, but the fact that we've come a long way. We have a long way to go, but we don't appreciate that. There was a time in our history when white people were put in prison because they taught black people to read. And many of our young people aren't reading at the rate that they need to. And so we need to let this story out. And this stuff is much more important than I think a lot of people think. The other thing I'll say is that this is the 400th anniversary of the first slaves coming to Jamestown. And yet I don't see much on the news of that. And it's not to embarrass America, but it's a reality that started this trend in this country. And this history is important. Well, I'll say before Dad, on the back of my card, I have a picture of Dad, Ralph Abernathy, who was Dr. King's right-hand man, and Dr. King at a press conference. This is for my nonprofit. And one of the reasons I do that is young people, when you talk to them, think Dr. King could have had breakfast with George Washington. They have no context that this is Dr. King was alive when I was alive and when Dad. So, Dad, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I think, that's, I think, one of the contradictions of our great land. I mean, with all of the significant things we've done, that there's the inability to acknowledge the contradictions. Growing up in the South, my wife and I attended segregated schools, and saying the Pledge of Allegiance, we ended always with liberty and justice for all. And that was a contradiction. And so I think that we could be much healthier, and I believe we are edging toward that, where in fact we take seriously our history. I think it was Santa Anna who said, they who do not remember their history are likely to repeat it. And I believe we're beginning to recognize, of course, I think that other people are hurting for reasons other than race, and therefore trying to see from whence comes this. And so I think that's important. Yeah, Martin Luther King was, of course, significant, and of course people ask why did he become the figure that he became. Of course, as I indicate, I met him some 61 years ago. One of the things that really impressed me about him was that even though he was just a magnificent person at platforms, as a preacher, as a speaker, in one-to-one relationships, there was a kind of humanness, almost a kind of humility that was important. I sometimes say that some leaders are so impressed with their own charisma that they must show it wherever they are. And that was not true for him. And so I think that was one of the things. I think that there was a love of the country. And I think he of course, believed in the documents of freedom and lifted them up and attempted to push this nation to become what it has not yet become. And I think there is appreciation for that, and I believe there's a growing appreciation. And I guess the other thing I would say is that in his protest, there was clearly a commitment to nonviolence, not only in terms of physical action, but nonverbal in terms of violence. We were talking earlier about how in social media, how negative sometimes things can be. And there's something about nonviolence that is important in terms of dealing with persons with whom you disagree, protest. And I think that was at the essence of, he of course founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and that was what they were about, what we were about.
And I would just add that in my work at Fairleigh Dickinson, we're working with entrepreneurs and really advancing something I call the E-mindset, or entrepreneurial mindset. And you realize that mindset is what counts. And so there's an incremental mindset where people say it's risky to change, and the entrepreneurial mindset says it's risky not to change. And Dr. King, really got this country to look at this idea that non-changing is risky for the life and survival of this country, and that we had to change. And so that mindset that he led, and the other thing I say is that people don't give many of the women of the civil rights movement credit, that the bus boycott and others wouldn't have happened without the incredible work of women throughout the movement. And so the Rosa Parks was one name, but there were thousands of names. And so it really, Dr. King was the figurehead, but it really was changing the mindset of the country in a way that has transformed it in many ways.
Yes, that's writ large, freedom of speech, freedom of protest, freedom of assembly. And that's the essence of democracy. And it is amazing how important, how people do not speak up. There's this often quoted phrase, I think it was a German who was active first as a Nazi fighter in the First World War, but became a minister. But we know those words. He says, when they came for the Jews, the trade unionists, and the Catholics, I did not speak up because I was not one of them. But when they came for me, there was no one left to speak up. And I think that there is a recognition that the hurtings of some people have a way of sort of ending up hurting us. And therefore it's important for us. Martin King had that great phrase, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And I think that's clearly is important in terms of protest.
And I'll add one of the things, again, people forget that Dr. King was as focused on human rights as he was on economic rights. The March in Washington was the march for freedom and jobs, the Poor People's Campaign. And so one of the reasons that I'm at this Entrepreneurial Institute at Fairleigh Dickinson is to really help to take some of the economic rights through entrepreneurship. And one of the things that we learned in business and in this is this idea of empathy, of really understanding other people's feelings. And so I talk about this thing called ineffective empathy, which is understanding other people's feelings, but putting solutions that are beneficial to you, not them, as opposed to effective empathy, where you understand other people's needs and you put in solutions that are beneficial to them. this country has come a long way, but we're in this ineffective empathy where we understand they're poor people, we understand there's racism, but our solutions are beneficial to the people in power, not to really making social change. So the next generation is to kind of take it to the next level, to say that we need to provide solutions that are beneficial to the people that are hurting.
And I would add to that, when one talks about empathy, and I think that's one of the things about Asbury Park, and I'm pleased that Madison Marquette is involved in it. And we've got to work at it, but because of the size, geographical size of Asbury Park, and because of its small population, we have an opportunity to really work at empathizing, if you would, because we're so close to each other. And I have wanted to suggest that even when we differ in this community, we must do it agreeably, because we're going to run into each other. And that though we may differ with each other on one point, we've got to be allies on another. And I guess I'm very pleased that Madison Marquette is doing what it's doing. I was interested as I sort of asked about its mission. This whole idea of place, et cetera, is very important. And I see this as an important kind of entity within the life of Asbury Park.
Well, one of the things, so I wrote this book called Intelligent Influence, and we're all products of our influence. And that one of the things that we remember is that actually the research shows that our favorite music is the music we heard between ages 13 and 24. Doesn't mean we don't like other stuff, but that's the music when we first fell in love. And what people don't realize is that our music is very different. So depending on your generation, depending on when you grew up, depending on who you listen to. And so when we talk and really want to stand up, it's important for us to understand that we're talking to people whose music is very different. And it's almost as if we're trying to convince people, some people whose music may be racism, to say automatically, well, my music is better than your music. Doesn't mean you have to accept it, but you have to get them to understand your own music. And so when you're standing up for yourself, so often, even those of us that stand up for folks who are struggling, we assume that people should have our music, should think the way we do. And so we have to be more sensitive to understand why they don't get it, vice versa. And so if we begin to put in, when I start talking about influence, it makes kind of conflict a lot easier. Because it's not that I dislike you, it's that my influences are different than your influences. Let's come together to figure out how do we compromise. So I think there's an opportunity to stand up in ways that we haven't been able to stand up if we really think of things in that context.
I think of two things. Of course, many of us know the name of Jesse Jackson. And one of the things that he did early in his life was, of course, to visit so-called projects, poor communities, and working with youth who had a sense of nobodiness. And he had the chant, having them repeat, I am somebody. I may be poor. My housing may not be good. I may be black. I may be Latino, or I may be something else, but I am somebody. And I think that was important. And the other thing, there's this wonderful phrase, I want to be me without making it difficult for you to be you. And I think discovering what it means to be who I am without feeling that it's necessary to be anti-someone else is so important. And for me, that's what community is all about. And of course, this is, again, my hope for Asbury Park, because it just seems to me that we have some opportunities here because of what we see as deficits. Our deficits are really our strengths, if in fact we could work on that. Whatever disagreements we're having right now or beyond, I think can be worked out. I guess I want Asbury Park to break some new ground so that when historians write of this era, they'll be writing about, of course, Madison Marquette and other entities in this community, but simply to say that Asbury Park was a community, a small community by the sea that did things differently, that dared to be different. And what a difference that made. It made a difference not only for Asbury Park in New Jersey, but in fact the nation needed a city like that was willing to sort of break through boundaries. And I think that's so important.
Well, and again, I when we talk about influences, I really talk about my dad and my mom. I'm blessed to have, the best parents in the world, the best, the parents who pushed me and made me believe who I was. I mean, I've been very big in tennis. I was on the board of the United States Tennis Association because my dad tells a story when he lived in Galveston. He would peer through the walls of a white only country club where people wore white and blacks weren't allowed. And so I was born in Boston, and Dad said, I want my firstborn son to play tennis. And so that tennis opened doors. It helped me get into Princeton, and I got to meet a lot of CEOs because of tennis. And so those influences that you can be whoever you want to be have really resonated. The other thing, and Dad is known for civil rights and human rights of every type, not only just rights for African Americans, but rights for people who are gay, rights for others, that we are all individual. And so you've learned that it's important to stand up not just for issues that relate to you, but to stand up for issues for everybody. And so because I went to Wharton and I'm in the business world, and I think the business world has tremendous opportunity, and I applaud Madison Marquette and others to really help to transform, to kind of carry on the message of Dr. King in a very positive way, to eliminate this involuntary poverty, which I think will eliminate many of the social problems that we're talking about. And so I'm just blessed to have wonderful parents, and I'm trying to pass it on to my 14-year-old daughter, Ashley, to help her understand she can be whoever she can be. And that's the generational influence, which has been very, very positive. So I publicly want to thank my dad and mom.
But if we're talking about influence, I think one of the interesting things in terms of places where we may differ a bit, but you've helped me. Because of my own struggles economically and otherwise, and of course being African American growing up in the South, I've had some reservations about capitalism. And one of the things that you've said, of course, is that it's not capitalism, but it's really greedy capitalism. And I think that of course, is very important. And I guess it's interesting how I, as a civil rights, not an icon, but a foot soldier, attempting to pass my baton on to my two sons, and how Dale has picked it up in a different kind of way. But it's important. We have our interesting discussion. Dale has a kind of passion because of what he's committed to. I probably am less passionate than you are, at least overtly, but nevertheless we feel deeply. And I guess that's important in terms of sharing that as father and son.
Well, but I would say that you're not less passionate. Again, as you know, being 85, you don't have, I probably, and my mom reminds us, so, that you had the same energy I had when you were my age. And so, but one of the things that I think is important is that so often we want to kind of vilify institutions, to say the problem is capitalism or the problem is this. And so one of the things we need to step back and look at what I call the fact that we don't have democratic capitalism anymore, a capitalism where big companies, international companies pay less in taxes than the local pizza shop. And so we need to that's why I'm so excited about entrepreneurship, because I think America was a startup corporation, and we've kind of lost that. We need to really encourage the small business, which are going to create the local jobs, which are going to create the Asbury Park jobs. Those are the things. We need to really, as a society, reward, companies that hire people. And I think that's part of the civil rights movement. That's part of taking it to the next level, because those companies are going to hire people who may have come out of prison, who've been marginalized. And so one of the things we're starting with this Gil Caldwell Foundation is what we call the Audition Temp Agency. And that if you've been out of prison or you've been unemployed for a long time, companies can try you for 4 hours and have you audition. And if that works, then do another 4 hours and then another 8 hours, and then they'll hire you. Those kinds of things, I think we all should come together, and that's part of the extension of the civil rights movement. So I don't know what you think about that.
Okay, I think that's important, and of course this may not make the presentation, but I'm interested that right at this point, as we're taping this, that Howard Schultz, of course, the former president of Starbucks, is of course exploring whether or not he'll make a presidential run. And of course I've suggested it somewhere, that it would be wonderful if maybe instead of wrestling with the politics of presidency, if he in fact would use his monies to invest in a community like Asbury Park, in fact to sort of furnish or emphasize the importance of discussion. I think that was important, that if in fact successful billionaires and millionaires could use their resources somehow other than necessarily through the political system. The model I think of course, is Andrew Carnegie. He established libraries. His name is on libraries in so many places. And would it not be interesting if there was someone, instead of wasting all of the money that we do in political campaigns, to invest in the kinds of things we've been talking about in this presentation, to simply talk about dialogue and how you in fact agree to disagree, et cetera, et cetera. That's sort of how I come at that.
Well, probably the only thing that my dad and I disagree a little bit about is this. I really detest the celebrity in America, that we are giving license to people because they're on TV, they're on screen, and really having been in business, you realize that the people who are really doing things, you don't know their names. The people who are actually making a difference. So whether it's the head of Starbucks or everybody knows that. But the people, the Madison Marquettes and others that are doing little things in the community are really the way we're going to transform things. And so I really say that it's really, and I call my term is people up instead of bottom up. Everything has been top down. And so we want to be people up, consumer driven. And I think if we can really get back to this consumer driven, that's where the power is. The power is even the economic, capitalistic power is in the people. That's not socialism, it's really capitalism. And so we need to begin to really encourage people and inspire people to say that we can solve the problems in Asbury Park together as a community. Well, I'll start. I actually was Deputy Commissioner, Department of Community Affairs, and on the Housing Authority, you have state appointed officials. So I was appointed to the Housing Authority in Asbury Park, 10 years ago, and stayed for about 4 years. And when I was here, I had visited Asbury Park, but I saw the beauty and the potential of Asbury Park. And my mom and dad had retired in Denver, Colorado, and my daughter was born, and they wanted to be close to my daughter. And I saw that Asbury Park was the perfect place for them. My dad loves urban communities, loves being active in urban communities and addressing those issues. My mom loves the ocean. And so Asbury was I don't think there's any better place in the world for them to live than Asbury Park. And I think it's been proven true that they walk on a boardwalk and just understanding and being active in communities. So that's why I kind of encourage them to come here. And what's your experience, man?
That's a wonderful way for a son to say that he wanted parents around for being babysitters near him, you see, without telling us about the awful tax structure in this state of New Jersey, et cetera.
That's a whole different.
But yeah, again, I guess I've talked about its smallness. There is something about the scale here that offers opportunities for us to be very different if we dare. And on some of the issues we're facing right now, I just wish we would dare to sort of break the model, that corporations would break the model, that we and the citizens would break the model, and see that we could do things differently, and that it will make a difference long term. And historians like to talk about what was going on in Asbury Park at a particular time. And I guess I'm interested in what historians will be writing about this, and I hope that there will be some very positive, almost earth-shaking kinds of things that they'll be able to write about.
And it's an exciting time in Asbury Park. And as you said, Asbury Park geographically is small. If Asbury Park can't be a model of transformation economically, racially, in many different ways, who can? And so I think, hopefully this dialogue, and it's about being positive. See, so often we highlight the negative. So often we harbor on what's wrong instead of really saying, what is our vision for the future? Where do we see Asbury Park should be? What should, in 10 years, what do we want our kids to experience when they come to Asbury Park? And I think that's and again, I give credit to Madison Marquette is trying to think about that every day.
I'd like to say this. One of my dreams is that Bruce Springsteen, of course, did Born in the USA, would find a way to capture on song what's going on right now in terms of Asbury Park, so that he would talk about a city that's sort of risen, well, I guess he talks about it sort of rising from the ashes, but simply the kind of creativity that's going here, the challenges that we've got. For in fact, I think that would be important if we did that. I guess I say that, say music is important in this community, how important it is, and therefore if we could build on that is so very important.
So maybe we can challenge Bruce to do an Asbury Park song. Born in Asbury Park. And
some would say Born in the USA is an Asbury Park song.
But even putting Asbury Park's name in it could be...
Okay. Well, I guess I've tried to, what's that? Is it a song? People don't know it. What is it? You've got to accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative, and don't mess with Mr. In Between. Have you heard that song, Dale?
Yeah.
Oh, you've heard it, because most people have never heard of it. It's so old, I guess. But I guess I believe in that. And of course, I've got a number of kinds of things that almost have become mantra for me. I suggest, for instance, that if you are standing up on the inside, no matter how many times you get knocked down, you can bounce back up. And I guess I say that out of my own experience. I say that on my experience racially. I say it in terms of physically, in terms of I've got some disabilities now in my old age. And I simply remind myself that no matter how many times you're knocked down for all kinds of reasons, that be sure that you're standing up on the inside, which I think for me means, out of my own faith perspective, the sacredness of each person, regardless of one's faith, that there is something special about each of us, and don't let anybody take your that away. I mean, of course, thinking of Aretha Franklin, R-E-S-P-E-C-T, respect for others, but respect for self is, I think, so important. And I guess that to me, that's sort of the framework for, and of course, obviously my Christian faith, being rooted, thinking of myself as a follower of Jesus, who therefore I think had a kind of positive spirit about him. That sort of nurtures my positive spirit in attempting to keep that alive.
And I would say, again, being involved with school boards, that I'm very hopeful for the youth. I think young people have a resilience that in places like Asbury Park, which because they have to deal with so much and they know so much because of the internet and other things, I think that's very positive. One of the things that I've discovered, and I coined a term called urban traumatic stress disorder, that many urban students are dealing with almost PTSD symptoms because they deal with trauma at home and then go to a nice school and then go back to it. And so the beauty is, one of the things that can actually solve that, in looking at neuroscience, is something called mindfulness. Actually taking 5-10 minutes to spend time with themselves. And when I've done this, and I was running a school in Trenton and others, that it actually can really help kids take their many talents and begin to focus them. So I'm very hopeful that if we can really, if the adults can get out of the way and really support and positively influence young people in urban, suburban, rural areas, that our young people, because they know and care in ways that I think my generation didn't, can really help to take this world to the next step. And that CBS video, that CBS News piece on you and Mom and the fifth graders really proved that the future is in good hands. Young people genuinely care and are willing to make a difference in righting a wrong.
Mention your safety net trampoline idea.
Well, one of the things too is, and again, so much of it is influence and mindset, is that we in this country, we actually suffer from this myth of the self-made person, this idea that someone pulls themselves up by their own bootstraps by themselves. Nobody's ever done it alone. And we have to move away from that to realize that everybody who's successful in any way has had some people behind them and supporting them. We also have to get away from this idea of, because of that, of this idea called the safety net, that it's enough to kind of keep people, and it's important to feed people and keep them from being homeless. Instead, we need to look at the safety trampoline, this idea that we have to help people bounce back up into society. It's not enough just to kind of do a safety net, because oftentimes the safety net catches people and keeps them down. And so when we start to really think about how do we transform this country, it's really about the safety trampoline. And as I said, I really don't, I think we shouldn't have involuntary poverty in America, because if you're wealthy and people who were poor have money, then everybody becomes wealthier. So it's just good business for this country to really focus on this safety trampoline and kind of pulling people out of poverty, and by creating jobs. And really it's about creating jobs. And I think that's the next generation of this civil rights movement, is to really focus on jobs. And Dr. King knew it. Dr. King talked about jobs way back in the day. We don't pay enough attention to that.
Yeah, as you said earlier,
but we need to focus on that.
Yeah, the whole, as you say, the name for the March in Washington, for jobs and freedom.
Jobs and freedom. It was jobs. He knew the answer was jobs.
Sure.
And we seem to have forgotten that. Well, one, again, it's just an honor to share the screen with my dad. I think I'm very hopeful. I think we're in a wonderful time. It's a wonderful time to be alive, and largely because I'm standing on the shoulders of my dad and other foot soldiers who've made a difference. But it's important for us to pay attention, and I'm hoping this video and other things will get people to really realize that the solution is them. It's not looking at somebody else. It's not looking at a leader. It's really about us getting involved on a daily basis to really try to transform this country so it can be all that it can be.
I guess, yeah, I of course, I use frequently as a way of attempting to get people to be responsible is, of course, to quote Pogo, we have met the enemy and the enemy is us. But I think also in terms of what you're saying is that in addition to being the enemy, we are also the possibility. And therefore we have met the possibility and the possibility is us. And I guess for me, that's important. Regardless of what the walls or the barriers are, believing in the possibility, believing in the ability to transcend is, I think, so important. And I guess therefore optimism for me is not is what I'm thinking, trying to think of a word. When one is too optimistic, there's a way of putting it down, wondering why are you so optimistic? But it seems to me that that's necessary. I'm challenged by doors that are shut in my face, and I guess everybody would be challenged by that and decide that there's a way over, around it, or through it that I will be about or help others to do that.